everybody. It's Wednesdays evening here in Europe, which means it's time for a new episode of Fullfunnel Live. We did a quick research in our community last time after our podcast with Amy Loesch from Charles Gates, when we discussed this live case study about Charles Gates' ABM program, and more specifically, the account-based content that they were running. And we got quite a few questions about leveraging account-based content in your demand generation program, and also how to make sure that you have more accounts that are aware of you, right? You can't talk about accounts that don't know you in a way that you want to sell your product. So we thought that it would be worth to share the entire process, how to influence holistically the entire buyer journey with account-based demand generation. That being said, where you guys all joining us from? Let us know in the chat. I'm again chatting from our office in Villarreal, and Vlad.
I'm from my home office in Valencia. I think it's really good to chat about this because I think what we hear a lot, I think every time we speak to a new client, there is the same challenge. That especially when you talk to sales, right? We lose out on brands, the target accounts are not aware of us. And then, okay, how can you actually create the awareness of these, let's say, target buyers? How can you make it relevant? How can you make sure that they actually see your content? So these are all the things that we are going to address today.
We have a lot of examples, so we decided normally during Fullfunnel Lives we don't prepare decks, but just pick up maybe examples, infographics that support the topic of the podcast. But today we have literally a lot of examples, so we created a small deck that we want to share with you. And the first thing that we want to address, right, it's the buyer journey. There were plenty of episodes, and we have in-depth guide in our blog about buyer journey. But the key point is how our customers are actually buying, right? If you think from the perspective of buyer, or if you have ever been a B2B buyer, right, you can immediately recognize the patterns. Question: how do you become aware of the brand? Right, first, because you are not going to buy a random product that you have never heard. And obviously, the higher is the contract value of your product, the more, let's say, the more trust, the more credibility that product should have. So how you become aware of that product, right? In most cases, it happens through the social, especially if you're in the tech vertical. But what attracts your attention, right? In most cases, it could be the comment that your colleague left and you saw a post from somebody, or that post appeared in your newsfeed, it attracted your attention and sparked your curiosity. Maybe you saw a relevant ad, not just a generic one, but a relevant ad that resonates with your jobs to be done, right? That's one of the steps. The second one is private chats. A lot of, let's say, even vendor evaluation or vendor selection or vendor awareness happens during one-on-one conversations when, let's say, I'm talking to Vlad, or let's assume we need a sales tool, right? I might reach out to a few sales directors of our clients and ask them, hey guys, what would you recommend for this specific challenge or for this specific need, or what are you currently using? Or maybe reaching out to our peers from sales that we are connected on LinkedIn, right? Quite often in the conservative markets, especially, think about manufacturing, retail, pharma, etc. People know each other, right? And they trust each other's opinion way more than the content that is coming from vendors, right? But to be able to get into that consideration, you need to make sure that these people are recommending you. Yesterday, just to give a practical example, yesterday Vlad did a quick research for one of our clients on Reddit, right? And there are a lot of threads that actually prove it. We have never seen it. And we don't know these people because on Reddit, you know how the titles look like. It's not the LinkedIn, right? So you don't know who is like whatever, Mouse Jeremy on Reddit, right? Or Uncle Ben, I don't know, or other weird, titles that people might have. But that was like exactly the situation. People come there, they ask in the community the question, hey, here is my specific challenge. Unfortunately, I can't reveal all the details because of NDA, but to give you an idea, it was the practical thread. I have this challenge. Who might I need to find a solution that will help me really fast? And then there was a person who recommended our client's product, right? The next follow-up question, have you personally tried it? And then the person says, no, I didn't, but I have heard a lot of good stuff and I saw some of their content. It seems to be a really good product, right? And this is how you influence what we call the dark social, right? The conversations that we are not aware of. So to appear in that set, and this is how the awareness is being created. And lastly, similar to this, we have internal awareness. Simple example. There is, like, let's say I am VP of marketing. I know we have an issue with our sales. We work in silos, but we want to fix it, right? Then I come to LinkedIn and I don't see any piece of content, but suddenly VP of sales sends me a Slack message saying, hey, did you see that post? What do you think about this? It seems that it's exactly what you were talking about, how to break the silos between our teams, right? Then I check, it makes sense. I start evaluating that product. I start evaluating that vendor, right? Or at least that vendor appears in my radar. So in a nutshell, this is how the buyer journey, this is how the vendor awareness, right, occurs. These are the main activities and channels. And in most cases, this, let's say, trust and credibility is gained through the content. Now, the question is how to make it account-based, how to make it relevant to our target accounts, and how to ensure that you actually influence the entire journey. Because, okay, I became aware of your product, but if we don't have next meaningful nurturing touch points, there won't be anything, right? So you can't expect that just because somebody mentioned our company or our product on Reddit, it will immediately trigger the sales opportunity, right? You need to have holistic set of different touch points, and we usually break this into different levels of demand. So maybe, Vlad, let's start with the first one, with the learning demand.
Absolutely. So basically what you see here, we have here an overview of 3 levels of demand that your buyers go through. And for each of them, we have the level of intent, sales cycle length, how the journey might look like, and what are your goals to reach the buyers at the intent at this level. So the first one is learning demand. It is simply to say that if you look at your buyers, they are not buyers for the majority of the time. They are, just dealing with their work, and they have a demand for content, demand to learn, become better at their work, at their job. And so this is what we call learning demand. They are dealing with specific challenges. They want to know more about theirs, maybe want to know what's happening in their industry. Now, this is actually where a lot of companies actually don't spend a lot of their effort. They don't create a lot of content for this level, because here they are just looking for information that is relevant to what is top of their mind. And if they're not yet looking for a solution, the solution, if you start talking about the solution, is not going to be relevant. At the same time, what we know from experience, but also recent research from Trust Radius and the Pavilion community, is that 84% of enterprise buyers will actually shortlist the vendor they have discovered before they started the solution search, which is in our diagram here, the second level solution demand. So the first level is very important. And you can't be just talking about your solution. You need to be addressing the top strategic challenges that your target buyers have. What is the length of a sales cycle here? the length of a sales cycle can be anywhere between 6, maybe 24 months, maybe even longer, until they have actually experienced a problem, high priority problem that needs solving, which will be the second step. And then obviously, why? Because the intent here is very low. They're not looking for a solution. Andre already gave you a lot of examples of how buyers might discover a solution, how you may reach them with this. We're also going to share other solutions and examples, concrete examples, so I don't want to go into those details just yet. So this was learning demand. The next level is a solution demand. Maybe Andre, you can explain that part.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say I would love to drop 5 cents here. I know that a lot of companies, they actually ignore this learning demand. I feel this is the biggest problem. And to make it work, you need to ensure that that content and the entire messaging is aligned with the jobs to be done of specific buyer persona, right? And the more diversified is your buying committee group, the more diversified should be a content strategy. You need to have the key people who would be talking about different, let's say, pieces of content that are aligned with jobs to be done of these different buyer personas. So that's the only one way. But let's say what happens next if you are focusing on that level. You create awareness, right? You become associated to their strategic channels. You become associated as a vendor that they know that could help with specific challenge. But how to ensure that they trust your brand, right? This is where the second level helps. It's the solution demand. So we start talking and also to make it clear, this should be a balanced strategy, right? We have a mix of all of this content across our buyer journey. The point here is that now we need to talk about practical solutions. On the first level, let's come back to our VP of marketing and VP of sales example. We have a problem of teams that are working in silos, but more or less we're hitting our targets, more or less we are growing or whatever, maybe not that fast as we want. But at some point, there is clearly an evidence. We analyze our historical growth and we see that we are not going to hit our revenue targets next year, and we need to do something around this. So then we start looking for different solutions. What would be the best way? And I might look for the practical content that, and not the vendor, but the practical content around this. What would be the best way? Maybe it's account-based marketing, or maybe if you have, because ABM has many shadows, right? ABX, AB whatever, like people call it anyway that they want for us, but still call it old school account-based marketing, right? Let's say they define ABM. They don't have maybe practical experience of doing it, or they have done it in the past and in not efficient way, so they are not sure what would be the best way. So they start digging deeper, right? The point is that the problem is already prioritized. It becomes one of the strategic initiatives, and they want in-depth content that explains how that solution might work, right? Typically, that length might depend on, obviously, on the how high you try to climb, right? If you're selling to mid-market or enterprise organizations, the cycle may vary, but more or less it could be 3 to 6 months, right? The point is that as your team, at this point, you will see the spike in engagement. You can track your intent data, and this is where you identify accounts that are aware of you and that are consuming your content. So they are looking for the solutions, and potentially they associate your brand with one of these solutions, right? This is the key. You want to be associated as a strategic vendor to a certain challenge. And when they finish their research, when they get clear, okay, so ABM seems to be the best solution, they start looking for the vendors. And this is the shortest part of their buyer journey, right? The demand for vendors. So let's cover quickly that one.
So this is where they are actually starting to consider you as a vendor. So they're looking for a concrete vendor, they're considering you, and your goal here is really to generate sales qualified opportunities. And the way that you do that is you want to make sure that you're clearly communicating how you're different and worth buying. And if you have done your work so far, you have identified, like Andre just mentioned, in the previous stage, you started to identify those target accounts that maybe have started checking you out as a potential vendor or learning from you. You will have actually start to understand what are the exact challenges that they are looking to solve, what are their jobs to be done, so that you can at this stage go as personalized as possible and show them how not only in a generic way your solution might be a good fit for their situation. For a SaaS company of this size, this is what we can do, and we can help you in a specific way. We work, like, for example, if you would go to our website, you will see a generic value proposition that we help B2B companies with high ACV to generate demand and by implementing ABM marketing, et cetera, et cetera. But if we are actually in a contact with an account, or we have been researching the account and we know that their challenge is, I don't know, I will give a concrete example here, is that they need to generate 24 million revenue and they have a 69 million revenue, $69 million dollars pipeline gap. And the reason why they have this gap is because they, have, let's say, MQL, and I think what they said was kind of random acts of marketing or something like that, right? So now we can craft a very dedicated, personalized value proposition. In other words, we can create what is sometimes called buyer enablement content that will help really communicate, okay, for those specific challenges in that situation, this is how we can help you, and this is why this would be a good fit, and why also you might consider us instead of our competitors. Maybe if you're selling a product, this could also include some sort of a comparison chart. It would obviously also include answers to the questions like, do you have experience in our industry? Obviously sharing case studies, other type of social proof, maybe actually connecting them proactively with some of your customers, some of your reference customers, and just offering them kind of a free advice session. This is something can work really well, where they can just share their own experience as they were basically working with you, or just solving the same kind of problem that this customer has. So here you're looking at a much shorter sales cycle. What's interesting actually is that when you look at a lot of companies and ask them, like, what is the length of the sales cycle, they might say something like 3 months or even shorter. And then what that actually means is that in a lot of cases, it simply means that that's how they measure the sales cycle. They actually are talking to accounts based on inbound inquiries or referrals to accounts that actually already sales ready, have already pre-selected them as one of the potential vendors, already shortlisted them. And then of course the sales cycle will be that short. So it's always important to understand, like, what is the actual what are you actually measuring? And so we are looking here at quite a short sales cycle. It might be even a month, 3 months, again depending on complexity of your procurement process. You might have an opportunity which may still need 2 months or 3 months to close if you're dealing with very large organizations. And so again, here, just to summarize, it is about buyer enablement, which is concrete content that shows how you're different with buying for their specific challenges, as much as possible personalized to their specific situation, industry challenges, type of buyer, and also obviously answering any objections that they have, showing social proof with case study, and maybe like some sort of comparison, helping them understand, of course, at a later stage also how you might help them generate the ROI, maybe some sort of a business case might be part of that, et cetera, et cetera. So this is how you would generate the demand on that level when they're already checking you out. Now, this is a high-level framework that will help you think about, maybe you can use it on the one hand to also evaluate the type of content that you have. Do I have content on that will help me to create this awareness to the buyers? Do I have the content that will help explain why our approach, generate the awareness of us as a potential solution to a specific problem, and then also the buyer enablement content? But now we would really like to give you a very practical framework on how to actually create that content that you can implement before the end of the year, I'm sure. And also we want to share a bunch of examples and also some caveats, like concrete examples, along with some caveats, what you need to be paying attention to. So Andre, maybe you can share how to actually plan that content.
Yeah, first of all, I would like to summarize everything that we have just shared. So in a nutshell, if you look at these three different levels, right, what type of content do we need to have? We need to have buyer persona specific content, right, aligned with their specific jobs to be done, specific buyer persona challenges, right, not just generic ones. Then we need to have solution specific content for specific buyer personas, right, how these people could implement it. And lastly, we need to have what Vlad called the buyer enablement, right? How they could actually sell your product to their teams internally, right? What might help, how they could argue why they should pay for that product or for just to pay for that vendor. This is the key. Now, the strategic document that we use, and that may be the next logical question that you have, okay, but how we are going to create the program based on this high level overview, right? For this specific need, we always do the cluster decomposition. And maybe just for a second, I will stop sharing my screen here, and I will share the entire document so everybody could see it, right? We have this, what we call cluster decomposition. So we create clusters are the accounts that fit your, I just will always remind about this. Clusters are accounts that fit your ICP, but have the same challenge, right? So they belong to the same use case. And for this specific reason, we do this holistic decomposition, right? What are the jobs to be done of these people? What are their KPIs? What market trends related to our product do they currently look at? What challenges do they face? What are the root reasons of these challenges? And we categorize it, right? We put it, we know that each question addresses one specific stage of the buyer journey, and it's aligned with the level of demand, for example, demand for content, etc. And we completely understand that this content it doesn't mean the buying intent. Like, let's look at this podcast episode. We clearly understand that everybody who is listening to us live doesn't have a buying intent at the moment. So we do it purely for educational reasons, right? And more or less you can put it into the category. It's the mixed category. It's the demand for solutions / demand for content, right? Some of you might be on that stage. Some of you might be on that stage. Now, when we do this breakdown, the next step is coming up with different content ideas based on our cluster decomposition. What content should we create? What content should we prioritize? What content can help us to influence that buyer journey? And obviously, you can repurpose some of the existing content, right? You can pick up, maybe you have nice decks that you can use, right? Maybe there are some good guides that you can use. Maybe there were some keynote presentations that your leadership did on industry conferences, and you can pick it up. You can use these ideas, right, to influence the entire buyer journey. When you finish this exercise, you'll have plenty of ideas that you can use, and then you put it into a calendar, right? You start thinking about, also if I'll scroll down, we have the idea of channels and activities. This is where it's essential to get feedback or input from your subject matter expert, right? That person could share. And I feel that it's one of the most undervalued steps in the entire process. Asking, okay, think if I was interviewing SME, think back to your days when you were working as our target buyer persona, right? What channels were you using? What did you hear your peers were using? What content resonates with you? What types of content? What's the best way to engage with you? Or how did you learn about different vendors, right? And obviously that could be accompanied also with the inputs from the customer research. You can run customer research and get a lot of these insights. So in a nutshell, you finish it and then you prioritize. You create simple calendar, you define, okay, this would be the, like this idea, we want to run webinar on this idea and we want to ensure that all our prioritized accounts will invite them, right? These pieces would be in our thought leadership program. This is something that we want to cover in our podcast. This is what we want to share in newsletter. This is what we want to recreate in our email nurturing sequence. These posts we want to use in our ads or this specific messaging. These posts we want to boost with our thought leadership ads, etc. Right? This is how you come up with this holistic program. Next, you dive deeper into the, let's say, demand for vendor. What activities might help? What content do we need? And for this reason, obviously, you need to deeply understand the internal selling process, right? What content can help a specific buyer persona to sell our product internally, right? And then you define these activities. So in a nutshell, this would be the process. And then in a few minutes, we'll share with you the practical examples. But let us know in the chat, please, if that makes sense to you so far. Put thumbs up, put plus, whatever you prefer. Just curious to hear your feedback, guys. And while you are typing, just a very quick note for you. Yeah, thank you, Karen. Thanks, Josh. We also, because, thanks, Dana. Good to see you, by the way. Long time. One of the things that I would love to quickly mention, we record a very in-depth and practical demand gen course, and which is in nutshell account-based demand generation, which will be live in January. And if you guys, it would be the same practical as our flagship Fullfunnel ABM course. So if you are interested, I dropped a link in the chat. It will be also in the podcast description, so you can join the waiting list, and we'll announce, and you'll get an announcement when the course goes live, so you can grab it with the early bird price. That being said, let's come back to our deck and share with you the practical examples. By the way, Josh, yeah, additional contributor can be community SMEs, absolutely 100%. So I didn't mention this explicitly, but any type of SME is great, either external or internal, right? So both of them create examples. Okay, so cluster decomposition, we just tackled it. Let's move to the practical examples.
So here we want to share a bunch of examples of demand generation in action with some caveats. And to start with, it's not really important, like a lot of companies might focus at the beginning when they're starting to do, especially during the awareness stages, where you're still not expecting revenue, might start to look at metrics like engagement, which are definitely important, right? But also might be discouraged because they are not getting, maybe especially in organic sense, as much as engagement as they would like on their content. And what I mean by that is, let's say we might be running this podcast live every week. We might be, sharing some content on LinkedIn in our case, and you might get discouraged if, by some chance you're starting, okay, we have been doing this for a while, so it's a little bit different, but maybe while you're starting, I remember the first time we ran our live podcast, it was maybe 11 people, if maybe not even fewer. And, but by the end of the podcast, we got such encouraging feedback. First of all, we knew that it was the right type of audience, but also the feedback, the qualitative feedback we got was amazing. And this is what kept us running at the beginning. But what keeps us running this further is the comments like this. What you see here is actually a head of marketing that reached out to us. It's like really big, everybody will know them, like a really huge tech brand. And I love the way that they had described this. So this was actually a transcript from the discovery call saying, after describing the problem, he said, I've been following one or two webinars that your organization is providing. Now, people, when they say webinars, we know that mean this live podcast, because that's how a lot of people perceive these live podcast episodes. We run webinars separately. It doesn't really matter, right, how you call it. And he said, I also received your newsletter, and combination of what you said in the last newsletter. And he said, at the moment, the pain was really quite high. So I think that's very important, of course. So there was that trigger for them to say, okay, we have this high priority pain, or we have this problem that is a threat to high priority business objectives. This is the starting point of a lot of buyer journeys, right? And now your content has resonated. You just spoke to me about it, and we decided, okay, it was the end of the year. It was also the trigger from the perspective, okay, we need to plan the next year. It was a trigger for him to reach out to us. So it is about the relevance of content. So the step that Andre just shared with you about cluster decomposition, involving your SMEs and basing yourself on the specific pain points of your target account cluster, based on the input from people who have sat in their shoes and the customers themselves, based on customer input research, is essential, right? So that you can have that relevance. Speaking about content, another quick example is somebody reaching out to us, or this company here, as you can see, what are core marketing sales goals? So this is in our intake form, and she said, we just launched an ABM program recently, but seem to be doing what you say not to do in your newsletter. So you can see how a very relevant content that is very linked to their specific job to be done. And in this case, the specific job to be done of that CMO was, we are starting an ABM program. I have put my neck on the line. I'm expecting to generate some results. Now you are saying that these are the mistakes that a lot of companies are making. I see that they are making these mistakes. Okay, let's explore that. And a final example that I wanted to share was just the reason that I like to share this was that actually I got an objection from one of our clients who said, oh, but senior leaders from these enterprise companies will never engage with your content. And I know marketing may be different, and this is true, and not everybody is going to engage with your content, but we do see this regularly. We see this is like, again, a brand that everybody will know. It's a huge consumer brand who just reached out to book a call simply because of a post that he read, which again was relevant and spoke to their very concrete challenges that they had at that moment. So making your content very relevant, but also, as you can see, what are the kind of channels that I think, like when you're thinking about the levers of demand and you're thinking especially about awareness, you can't be thinking about high intent channels, such as, for example, specific Google searches or, directories and things like that. Here, you're thinking about channels that they are using for professional education. Like you can see, in our case, these were LinkedIn, newsletter, and our live podcasts, which people subscribe to learn, like you are now attending this to learn, not to buy from us. And this is exactly where, if you're talking about strategic challenges, you can get the attention of the buyers. So let's share other examples with other caveats. Andre?
Just wanted to address one of the things that you mentioned, this bias that but in our industry, the senior buyers are not consuming the content. I often hear the argument they are too busy. And just because of this, then it's kind of an excuse to have bad content, or just post something like, hey, go and read our article. For me, it's like people are ashamed to promote what they actually created, right? So I'm asking, I'm always given that question that is a litmus test for the quality of the content, right? So you spend money and time on creating a certain piece of content, right? And then for what specific reason you are doing this, if you don't make sure that your target buyers are consuming it, right? So then it means that you need to improve a lot. This is one of the things. And also coming back to the initial point, last week we had Amy on our podcast. Real estate sector, right? Conservative market, for sure. Do people actively engage with the content? No. Does it mean that they don't consume it? Also, no, they consume it, and they consume it passively. And this is the key for many conservative markets, for retail, for manufacturing, for consumer product goods, for healthcare, for pharma, for cybersecurity. We see it all the time. So the only difference with marketing and sales sector is that, first of all, these people are not actively consuming content and are not actively liking it, right? So you don't have the same thought leaders in these verticals as you can see in marketing and sales. The second one is that most of the content is really boring, right? Like it's either low quality or sometimes it's good quality, but it's not presented in a meaningful way, right? It's everybody is busy. So then I'm asking, if everybody is busy, why then even producing that content if they are not going to read it anyway, right? So the point, the way I'm heading with this, make sure that your content stands out, and that is so in depth that you are competing for attention, right? So it's so valuable that people are willing to spend their time, trade their time to read your piece of content. As simple as that. So let's head to the other example that we have here, right? Obviously, based on the number of touch points you have seen, right, and the real buyer journey length, you need to understand that this is a long-term strategy. Sometimes, but it's mostly coming from smaller companies, and maybe especially from tech startups or scale-ups. They come and ask, okay, so from what number of posts will start seeing sales opportunities? I mean, I wish that process would be linear, and there would be a specific formula that you can apply in Google Sheets that will calculate how many posts do you need to generate sales opportunity. In a nutshell, this is not how the buyer journey looks like, and this is what we have discussed already a lot, right? The demand is created over time, over multiple touch points, and this is a simple example that we share quite often out of curiosity with Vlad once we tracked one of the sales opportunities. And this is maybe for America, it's SMB. In Europe, it's definitely mid-market company, I would say, right? But here's an example of that company's journey, right? These are only visible touch points, 87 touch points, 1 year of consistent nurturing. And then when we had a discovery call, they mentioned, the reason why we booked it with you, because in March 2023, you can clearly see it. We signed up for your Fullfunnel summit, so we didn't know you before. But then we started following you, and we were in your newsletter, right? So time to time, we were consuming that content. Then there was a specific challenge, which we were, like you have seen it in the previous examples, right? And that resonated a lot. So we started to consume your content more actively and figure it out that you have a lot of practical guides on account-based marketing, right? And then when they prioritized their challenge, we had an opportunity to talk to them and explain how to implement a cohesive ABM and demand generation. So that's the key, right? Treat it as like all that framework, account-based demand generation, treat it as an ecosystem, like the system of multiple touch points that you need to run it, and it should be your evergreen long-term program, right? So, and here's a recent example, right? Look, which is, like, I know that it's so ridiculous because sometimes people on LinkedIn, they could pick up this simple example and say, hey, how I generated, like an enterprise sales opportunity from one podcast episode. But this is very cheesy, let's put it like this, right? In reality, what could be assumed as like, oh, they hosted the podcast with the client, so it immediately generated sales opportunity. In reality, it means that this was a multi-year nurturing, right? So like you can see the person saying, I've been reading content by you. It was an email to Vlad and Andre for years, right? Trying to apply parts of it. And that's the reality. This is how it looks like. And at certain point, something resonates with them, right? There is a trigger point for their outreach, or maybe there could be a signal. In other words, your sales team could pick up that signal and do the outreach, and they will book the call, right? So that could be another example. But what seems to be one touch point is an outcome of this influence on multiple levels of demand, right, across the buyer journey. And if you look at, so we just once extracted the input on how companies that come to us hear about us, we can immediately see that a lot of mention the content that they always say the LinkedIn, but we did this research, we know that in most cases they subscribe to our newsletter, they came to one of these Fullfunnel live podcasts or to our quarter webinars, right? And even despite the fact that they mentioned LinkedIn, we know that it's the ecosystem that influences the buyer journey, and this is how you need to treat it. The next part, which is essential, I feel, and Vlad loves to talk about it, is the dark, what we call the dark social, but it's exactly what we shared in the beginning, how your target accounts become aware of your product.
So let me just quickly cover this example because it was an example of actually a CFO that, but that's not typical for us. That it is the CFO that is engaging with our posts and having a conversation. But what was very interesting is that once we started having a conversation, one of the things he mentioned already from the beginning was, as you might see here, thank you, your fantastic diagrams are becoming well distributed on our company Slack channels. And by diagrams, what he meant was the diagrams that we use when we're posting LinkedIn framework. On LinkedIn, we are posting some frameworks. You probably know this is if you have ever seen our post, we frequently do that. And there's just 2 points here, a quick point about the diagrams. And why do I mention that? Simply because one of the things to consider when you're creating content is, like Andre mentioned previously, you're fighting for attention of your target buyers. So how do you win that attention battle? Well, one is by the quality of your content, but also thinking about what is kind of a unique way in which we can present content. For us, it was diving really deep into practical frameworks and illustrating that with the diagrams that we use. So it's something that creates in people's mind, okay, when I see diagrams, I think of Fullfunnel. Anyhow, that was a side note. The main point here being is that this conversation with the CFO progressed into a sales qualified opportunity, and that later became a project, a consulting project. So it was a one deal. And during that process, I had to speak to 5 people from that company, 5 different buyers with different roles, some executives, sales, marketing. And it was one of the easiest deals that I won. And I attribute part of that reason to exactly this remark from the CFO, that he was basically sharing our content on the team Slack. And so it was basically educating our target buying committee members with our content. And when I spoke to those people, they knew me, although I have never seen them. I have never seen them on LinkedIn. I've never seen them on, in our inbox or otherwise, but they knew me personally, knew, of course, Andre and our brand. And that's how they knew it, the so-called dark social. And I didn't have to explain and our approach to them or build any sort of trust, etc. I could really focus on just helping them understand how we might work together, how that will be valuable for them, how it would look like answering their questions, etc., which is a normal part of the sales process. So they're already pre-qualified and pre-warned. Now, this is interesting to consider again. We mentioned this several times, buyers may not be reading your content, or like this might be an objection that you get. But again, look at this. So we never saw them, but yes, they were reading, because they were reading in a private slide that is not traceable in your analytics software. It doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. And I just wanted to share the next caveat quickly, because it's very much related to that example, Andre. And as I mentioned, I need to leave, so I wanted to quickly share the next one as well. The way that this became a sales qualified opportunity was actually through what we called all-bound engagement. Now, I'll first just take a step back and explain what do we mean by all-bound, why is that important, and then go back to the example. So by all-bound engagement, we simply mean it is not enough to just sit and wait for the buyers to come to you based on the demand that your content and your activities have been generating. It does happen, obviously, and it happens over time, but some of the best opportunities happened when we use this initial engagement as a signal to start a conversation with the target buyer. So kind of as a trigger for an outbound approach. But when we say outbound in this case, we don't mean like, hey, you liked my post, do you want to hire us as a consulting company? It is more like, okay, hey, you liked the post, the post was, I don't know, it was about, let's say, a buyer journey, etc. Hey, we, also have this other guys that I'm happy to share with you. Are you looking to, map out the buyer journey of your target buyers? Like whatever the conversation was in this case, it was something like that. And over time, I was simply offering more information, and we were just having a conversation, helping him understand what he was trying to learn from this content, and think about how he might apply this in their company. And eventually, obviously, we just said, you know what, let's just have a call and see how we might be able to help. So it is essentially, first of all, not just sitting passively and waiting for the people to come to you, but it's also leaving them in control, which is to say, match the call to action with the level of intent. Somebody liking a post or reading your newsletter is not a reason for you to assume that their intent is to buy from you. Remember, they're probably at that first level of demand for learning. So if that is their demand to learn, meet that demand, offer them maybe more learning resources, or help them understand through a conversation and advice what they're trying to learn, rather than pushing them to buy, because that's not their intent, right? But it also means that if they are going deeper and they are mentioning that they're working proactively on something, there is no problem in offering that next appropriate step, again, matching your call to action with the level of demand that they are showing, right? And it also, here is a screenshot that it may look like it was one conversation, but it wasn't. It was a lot of back and forth. It took several months from the first outreach, based on him liking the post, and we had several back and forth conversations. I think in this case, it actually went relatively quickly, but it still took, I think, a couple of months, 2 months, before they became a sales qualified opportunity. So to summarize, dark social, the fact that your buyers may not be showing up in your stats doesn't mean that they're not listening. You really need to make sure that you understand by talking to them, by asking them, okay, how did you learn? How do you discover, really understanding how they actually go about learning, discovering solutions, but also then don't leave it to chance. Combine inbound and outbound. It's going to be easier for your salespeople to get responses if they're reaching out based on existing engagement with the right level of matching the call to action with the level of intent. And it's going to be a much better experience for the buyers. And at the end, it's going to also lead to many more conversations and many more opportunities.
Well, what we want to share at the end as well is one of the most under leveraged tactics. It's co-creation with the buyers, right? It's just, first of all, again, we spoke a lot about the problem with the content quality, right? And the second issue that we often hear complaints is that we don't have an active network, or we have a small network, and let's say we want to involve our salespeople, but nobody knows them, so they might be ignored, right? So the easiest way to solve it, for all the reasons that we shared above, is the co-creation with your target buyers in multiple formats, interviewing them on your podcast. What we did last week was, and you can leverage your current customers, right? You can involve deals from the pipeline. You can even involve churned customers. You can involve target accounts, right? And you can run these collaborations in multiple formats. This could be panel discussions. This could be private, whatever, virtual business breakfasts, right? Talking about specific use cases. It could be the simple content collaboration on posts. So, for example, Vlad once wrote an article about marketing positioning for B2B tech companies, and we interviewed CMOs of different companies that belong to one of the positioning categories that we were talking about, right? And why we are doing this? For several reasons. First of all, as we mentioned, peers like peers content much more than when it comes from vendors, right? And unless these vendors are recognizable and trustable, if you will, right? They have enough credibility. Then we leverage the network of our peers, just because, I mean, if they are sharing the engagement with you, you are expanded to their network and you can pick it up and start conversations, right? So this is one of the things to make sure that you influence the entire buyer journey, because also the co-creation, if you do co-creation with your clients, then you basically saw the email, right, that Vlad shared with you. Sometimes it triggers the sales process, right? If you co-create with your target accounts, you might be associated with them. So people by default, they don't know your level of relationship with these target accounts. They don't know if these accounts are customers of yours, right? But what they clearly see, they immediately make this link between your product and these accounts, and you become associated as a vendor that solves challenges for these types of companies. That's why it's so powerful, and that's why we highly recommend you to do. And lastly, again, just not to say that it gives more credibility to your content, and this also triggers this internal sharing and peer-to-peer sharing, right? This also leads us to the second category, amplification audiences, right? So aside from your clients and the side of target accounts, you have niche media owners, people who are hosting small, maybe just podcasts. When I mean small, not level of Tim Ferriss, right? Podcasts. So, and they shouldn't, right? They have a niche podcast, and your target buyers might be listening to it, which is fantastic. And these people might be recognizable, or these people might have a small community. These people might run a small newsletter, right? But this newsletter is followed by your target account. So, for example, we know a lot of newsletters like this ones on Substack, and they are just addressing the questions from technical audiences, or there is only CFO newsletter for CFOs, which is a fantastic one. So there could be multiple examples. Next, we have partner brands. And quite often, I mean, this is the lowest hanging fruit, right? You're partnered with one company, why not just join forces and co-create the programs and co-create content, and just make sure that your content influences the entire ecosystem, because your target accounts might see it coming from your partner. You can impact the new audience, right? And obviously, lastly, the industry influencers. So for a long time, I know that influencer marketing was only for B2C, but in the last few years, we saw a huge spike. A lot of companies are reaching out to thought leaders that help with the brand awareness, just simply because they understand it's, first of all, they gain credibility from that thought leader, right? And also they get additional brand awareness, which will take them years to get on their own. So I think one of the best examples we have seen is Cognism. Probably a lot of you have heard about Cognism, right? And they did a great program with a few sales leaders, including Morgan Ingram, and those people who are talking to the sales audience and have quite big network. So they were engaging with them, running a lot of podcasts, webinars, etc., which drastically impacted their pipeline and revenue, right? And also the engagers. I think this is the audience that is less obvious, and not everybody talks about this, but this is the audience that might never buy from you, but they could recommend you. Remember the example that I shared about Reddit, right? Somebody asked, and then a person replied, hey, check this product. Did you try this? No, but I have heard a lot about them and I'm reading their content. These are exactly the engagers. This could be, people like in our case, this could be marketing agencies or marketing consultants or sales coaches or whoever, right? So they will never buy from us. They will never become our customers, but just because they enjoy our content and they are also serving the same ICP, it's worth to invest into a relationship with them because they are recommending you, right? Think about the word of mouth. So that's why it makes sense to invest into this audience as well. And industry thought leaders, we quickly covered it. So I think we have 5 minutes left, and we have a few questions from our community. So Karen asked, what is the best content for activation middle of the funnel? I think partially we covered it, but maybe Vlad, you'd like to share a few things.
I think if you're talking about middle of the funnel, let's assume that these are the companies who are looking for a solution, what we covered with demand for a solution. When I say a solution specifically, is that they have a specific problem, they're looking for a solution, they're not necessarily looking at you as a vendor. So that, let's call that a middle of the funnel. I think the most important thing there is to explain, your content needs to communicate and explain why your approach is a good fit to solve their challenges. So I think Andre was using an example of, ABM. They may have a challenge with marketing source revenue. They're selling in complex B2B. Well, they may be looking at different solutions. They may be looking at starting a demand gen program. They may be looking to focus on enterprise customers to grow their, so ABM could be a good solution, et cetera, et cetera. They may be looking at completely different ways to solve that problem. And so you're teaching them about the approach and solution. What type of content can that be? Those can be more, that can be also longer form content, doesn't have to just be shorter form content or content that is completely for awareness, like it might be like purely on LinkedIn, it might be like guides, it might be like webinars. Again, you're not going to teach them about your product, but you're going to teach them about the approach. Let's say, again, ABM as a way to increase your marketing source revenue, where you're explaining the framework, you're explaining the steps, and you are featuring your solution natively within that content. You can still do that, and that's how you create awareness of your solution and already start influencing their purchase criteria, start helping them think in the right direction. Okay, if we are going to take an ABM solution, it should not make these mistakes, and it should be like set up in this way so that later on you're actually preparing them to actually consider you as a top vendor based on these purchase criteria that you have actually helped influence. Case studies are another very good example where you're sharing exact same similar company with exact same problems and how they solve them, again featuring your solution. But when I say case studies, I don't mean like a 1-2 pager self-promotional, self-serving case study that a lot of companies have on their website. I mean like a really behind the scenes whether it's a webinar or an actual written out guide or an interview with the customer, where they really go into depth on explaining how they came from, being where your prospect is with their problem to having a successful solution and results.
And I will quickly pick up the last two questions about methods of targeting small audiences via paid advertising and how to reduce complexities of reaching buyers on so many different channels. The answer is really simple. You don't need to be everywhere. You just need to figure out a few channels and excel at them. And to identify these channels, you need to run the cluster decomposition, you need to involve your SME, and you need to run customer research. As simple as that. Then you double down and you make sure that you do just the best possible job. You don't create mediocre content, you don't run mediocre activities, but you try to excel at it. As simple as that. And I saw a lot of great comments from you guys, so thank you so much for this. Was fantastic comment from Josh about handshake and further distribution. I would also like to address quickly a comment from Stefan about co-creation in pharma and life science. You don't need to, maybe it would be hard to co-create with your target accounts, but you can involve your customers. Or you can do paid engagement and just pay a few thought leaders, and this could be not thought leaders in the sense that they're independent, but this could be, people who are regularly given keynotes at industry conferences, and just involve them to pay for them and involve them into your account-based demand generation. So that could be one of the best ways, plus partners as well. So that being said, we have finished it on time. Fantastic questions, fantastic engagement. Thank you so much, guys. Quick announcement, next week we are going to talk about expansion programs in account-based marketing. So stay tuned. Next Wednesday, same time, we are going to talk about it. And if you are interested, sign up for our Demand Gen course. See you next week. Cheers. Take care.